Okay, so Isaac is frightened. Isaac shuddered. He blesses Jacob, who presented himself as Esav. He leaves, and then Isaac comes, and then Esav comes in. Isaac says Isaac is frightened, etc. So verse 34: When Esav heard his father's words, he cried out a great and bitter cry, and he said to his father, "Bless me too, O my father." Verse 35: And he said, "Your brother came with cunning and took your blessing." Your brother came with cunning and took my blessing. And he said, Esav continues, "Is it for this reason that he was named Jacob?" Now the word Yaakov has two meanings. It means heel, but it could also mean Bayakveni. We'll see the word, for he has deceived me twice. The word Yaakov could also mean to deceive. So he says, maybe this is why he was called Jacob, from the word Yaakov, deception, for he deceived me twice. He took my birthright, and behold, now he has taken my blessing. So most of the commentaries say, as soon as Isaac hears this, it actually makes him feel a little better, right? Esav is trying to get his father upset. In other words, he's showing how it's not fair. He cheated me twice, he took my birthright, and he took my blessing. But if you're Isaac, what is this story telling you? He took your birthright. Oh, tell me more. Oh, I sold him my birthright. Oh, so he is the firstborn. Oh, so maybe he is deserving of the blessing. So a lot of people think that that is already a shift. When Esav says, "Oh, he did it twice. He took my birthright, and now he took my blessing." But let's put that aside. And he said, "Have you not reserved a blessing for me?" So what does the father say? And Isaac answered and said to Esav, "Behold, I made him a master over you, and I gave him all his brothers as servants, and I have sustained him with corn and wine. So as for you, then, what shall I do, my son?" What is he saying? What is the father saying? Father saying, "I have no more blessings. I ran out of blessings." And O'Neill already asked last week, "What, you ran out of blessings? You only have one blessing?" Right? That's Esav's question. But that's what he's saying. He says, "You say for me a blessing?" Verse 36, "Have you not reserved a blessing for me?" In other words, let's assume that you thought you're blessing Esav. You must have left a little bit for the next brother. So give me what you would want for the next brother. So verse 37 sounds like Isaac is saying, "Sorry, what could I do for you?" Seems like I have no other blessing, right? He says, "I made him a master over you. I gave him all his brothers as servants, and I have sustained him with corn and wine." Grain, it was really grain and wine. I guess corn could mean grain. So as for you, then, what shall I do, my son? He's saying, I can't do anything. So what does Esav say? Esav says the obvious thing. Esav says, 38, and Esav said to his father, "Have you but one blessing, my father? Bless me too, my father." And Esav raised his voice and wept. So he says, "Give me." Again, he says, give me another. You only have one blessing, bless me too. And he's crying. I guess tears make move the father. And verse 39, he finds him a blessing. Verse 39 and 40. And his father Isaac answered him and said, "Behold, your dwelling place shall be the fat places of the earth and the dew of the heaven from above. And you shall live by your sword, and you shall serve your brother. And it will be, when you grieve, that you will break his yoke off your neck." In other words, it said that I gave the blessing to your older brother. The older brother will be the gvir, will be the ruler. He says that's at some point when you grieve, when you're upset, you could throw off his yoke. There's different interpretations. What that means, some interpretations, it means when the Jews are not following the word of God, then you can get rid of the yoke. Okay, so that's the story. But what's strange about the story is what changed in Isaac's perspective. There's a deeper story here. Initially, Isaac is basically saying, "I have one blessing. I can't do anything for you. I can't help you." And Esav says, "Didn't you reserve a blessing for me?" And after Esav says that, Isaac says, "No, I don't have." He implies that I don't have a blessing for you. And then Esav once again says, "Give me a blessing," and then he gives him a blessing. So why couldn't he give him the blessing early, right? So if you look at verse 36, he's saying, "Didn't you reserve a blessing for me?" 37, Isaac implies that he did not. "I can't do anything. What can I do for you? I can't do anything." 38, Esav requests again, "Bless me. You only have one blessing. Bless me also." And finally, in 39 and 40, Isaac remembers, "Oh, I do have a blessing." What changed? He just said he has no blessing. He just said, "I can't do anything for you." So something happened here. Something changed. What's the change?
I just have a question.
Go ahead.
If you don't mind going back to verse 30. I find it interesting that it says, "So that your soul will bless me." as opposed to you a blessing.
Right.
I mean,
Nafshecha, in biblical Hebrew, soul is also your will, desire, will. There's a verse that Chassidus always quotes from the book of Samuel, I believe, where God says, "Ein nafshi et amazeh," my soul is not to this people, meaning my will. So in other words, you could do something, you could give me something, but your will is not invested, and I sense it. And then you could give me a blessing with your full will and your full desire. And that's what Isaac, and that's what he's looking for. Okay, so I saw a beautiful commentary this morning. It was actually at 9:26. That's why I'm so excited about it. That's why I am saying it first, even though you skipped a little bit ahead. And this is from the Malbim. And the Malbim says like this: it's an absolutely fascinating concept. So the kernel of the idea we already said earlier, and that is that in Isaac's mind, there's going to be a partnership between Esav and Yaakov, whereas Yaakov is going to worry about the spirituality. Yaakov is going to study the Torah and worry about keep the ideas in the family alive. And Esav will have success and protect the family and have the strength and be the ruler and leader and support his brother. That was Isaac's model. That model also will happen later in Jewish history, because we know that amongst Jacob's 12 children, each had their own blessing and each had their own spiritual path. But there were two of the tribes that made this agreement, Yisachar and Zevulun, where Yisachar would study Torah and Zevulun was in commerce, and Zevulun would support their brother. So that model is actually a good model. It's a model that works in some cases. Not all of the Jews, but of the 12 tribes, two of the tribes made an agreement like this. So it's a possible model. Probably it's an interesting model. We already said that. So let's accept that as a given. That was Isaac's idea. Now, why Rebecca doesn't like that idea is another story. She doesn't think Esav is willing to wants the blessing for the greater good. He wants it only for himself. He's not going to support his brother. If that's right or wrong, that's a separate discussion. But let's assume that's Isaac's goal. And that makes a lot of sense because, as we said earlier, that Isaac never gave to Esav the blessing of Abraham, which he's going to give Jacob later in the story when he sends him away. So the blessing he's giving his son, who he thinks is Esav, is all material blessing. So why didn't he give him the blessing of the legacy? Because then he's reserving for the younger son. In other words, in his mind, this wasn't the ultimate blessing. This was one. This is two brothers that each brother has a certain position in, and together they will make one people. That is Isaac's idea. Now Isaac realizes that there was a problem. What's the problem? The problem is that Jacob received the blessing for the material. So in other words, Jacob himself will be able to support and protect himself. For whatever reason, that's what happened. Now, Esav comes to his father and says, "Give me a blessing." Father says, "How can I give you a blessing? What am I going to give you a blessing? That you're going to support your brother? Your brother doesn't need your support. He already has the grain. He already has the leadership. So you're really basically not in the picture, because it was clear that the spiritual side of the blessing is never going to go to Esav. That goes to Jacob. Then we had Isaac's idea was that the material side of the blessing, in other words, the material bounty of the house, the material success of the house, and the might to protect the family, he thought will go to Esav and they'll make a partnership. But now the younger brother took it all, took the material blessing. So to Esav, Esav says, "Give me a blessing." He says, "You're not part of your brother doesn't need your support. So just to bless you with materialism, that's a wonderful thing, but that's not part of what Isaac was trying to do. What Isaac was trying to do was give him a blessing of materialism that will support the spirituality of Jacob, the spirit of Jacob, the learning of Jacob. But now Jacob doesn't need that. So you're not in the story. I can't do anything for you." I can't give you any part of the legacy because the legacy has two parts, either the soul of the legacy, the blessing of Abraham, the spiritual part, or the material blessing that will support the spiritual blessing. But now if Isaac has both, then Esav, I have nothing to give you. In other words, even if I bless you, he says, I already gave your brother a grain. He already has wine. He already has leadership. He's not dependent on you. If he's not dependent on you, then your blessing is not supporting him. If your blessing is not supporting him, your blessing does not have any spiritual value. So what does Esav say? So he cries, and then he says, give me a blessing. Meaning, okay, so you don't want to give me materialism that will bless this, that will support the spiritual. So give me just materialism. That he can do for him. But that's not what, it's a tragedy, but that's not what Isaac said I can't do for you to begin with. Right? We have questions, what changed? First says, I cannot give you any blessing. And then he gives him a blessing. Esav already said, didn't you leave anything for me? He says, no, I left nothing for you. But then he finds another blessing to give him. So what changed? The answer is it's not the same blessing. Initially, what he tried to bless, who we thought was Esav, was, I'm going to give you a blessing for materialism that will support spirituality. So it's part of the holiness. But then when Isaac takes that, when Jacob takes that as well, and Jacob says, I can also do materialism, I can also be successful in the material world with the purpose of supporting spirituality. So now Esav is out of that picture. And Esav, therefore, is going to be the blessing that he can give him is separate from Jacob. You're going to get materialism as separate accounts, but it's just plain materialism. It's not materialism that is supporting the holiness. So that's what the Malbim says. And some people say that the word tarid, when you will grieve, tarid literally means go down. Arid could also mean to mourn. Some people say that means when you separate. You separate from him and go somewhere else, you'll be successful. But that represents the tragedy of Esav, that at least at that point in history, he cannot have materialism for the sake of supporting the spirituality, either because Jacob took it, or if you want to be kind to Jacob, because Rebecca and Jacob sense that Esav is not ready, is not there yet. Only at the end of history, which was told to Rebecca in the prophecy, Ravi Avoid Sa'ir, the younger one, the older one will serve the younger one. So then the might of Esav, which represents the Western culture, which represents the technology and the science, will serve Jacob, will serve the spirituality, but that would take a millennia for that to happen. But that explains what the change is. Initially, it sounds like Isaac has no other blessing, but then he finds a blessing. So what changed? Because initially he wants to give him a blessing that will support Jacob. And he says that we don't have. Jacob already is self-sufficient. So he's not dependent on you. And then he says, then Isaac says, okay, so give me a blessing. So he gives him a blessing. But his blessing then is disconnected from spirituality. Where do you see this? Very interesting. If you look at the blessing that he blesses, when Isaac blesses the son who he thinks is Esav, so there's two interesting things. First of all, he says, look at verse 28. First of all, he says, may the Lord give you. May the Lord give you. And then he says, dew of heavens and of the fatness of the earth. First, dew of heavens, then fatness of the earth. Now let's compare that to the blessing he ultimately gives Esav. 39. And his father Isaac answered him and said, behold, your dwelling place shall be at the fat places of the earth and of the dew of the heaven from above. So what first of all, he switches the order. He starts with earth, then goes to heaven. First fat of the earth, then dew of the heaven. But more importantly, what does he omit? He omits, may the Lord give you. Doesn't say God, why not? He's blessing Esav, he can't say, may the Lord give it to you. So some of the comments, so Malbim, I think the Malbim says this, that shows you that in the beginning, when he wants to bless Esav, he wants to bless, I'm giving you fat of the dew of the heaven and fat of the earth, but it's associated with God. The purpose is to support spirituality, right? But then when they get to the point where Isaac says, I'm sorry, your brother is not up for the partnership. Your brother has everything he needs. There's no room for you to support your brother because he already is self-sufficient. Then the son says, okay, so just give me a blessing for materialism that's disconnected from holiness. So he gives him a blessing. You should have the fat of the earth and the dew of the heaven, but it doesn't mention God to indicate that this blessing that you're getting is not necessarily connected to spirituality. It's not supporting spirituality, because otherwise it's a very difficult question of why he drops God's name.
So you're making the point that Isaac's actually trying to make it so that the two brothers get along?
That was his initial plan. A lot of people say that was his initial plan, because otherwise you have a big problem. The big problem is compare the blessing that he gives to Esav, that he gives to Jacob, who we thought was Esav, with its just materialism. And then if you look later, turn the page, and when he sends away his son to there on chapter 28, page 143, there he gives him a completely different blessing and a spiritual blessing. And there it says, right, I'm going to share the screen. And there it says spiritual things as well, right? There it says, turn the page to get to chapter 28. There, Isaac called Jacob and blessed him, and he commanded him and said to him, "You shall not take a wife from the daughters of Canaan. Arise, go to Padan Aram, to the house of Bethuel." Okay, you ready? Verse 3, and may the Almighty God bless you and make you fruitful and multiply you, and you shall become an assembly of peoples. Verse 4, and may he give you the blessing of Abraham to you and to your seed with you, that you may inherit the land of your sojourning with God, which God gave to Abraham. So he doesn't say earlier, he doesn't say the blessing of Abraham. He reserved the blessing of Abraham for now. So which means when he made this whole, we read this whole to-do about blessing blessing Esav. He wanted to bless Esav, and then Jacob stole it. We're not talking about the spiritual blessing. We're talking about the physical blessing. And he reserved the spiritual blessing for Jacob, the blessing of Abraham. So that leads some commentaries, certainly the Hasidic commentaries, to say that he wanted the partnership. He wanted the partnership. And Rebecca says, no. The idea of the partnership is correct. There should be a partnership between the material and the spiritual. But Esav is not ready for this partnership. Esav, at this point in history, doesn't want the partnership. He doesn't want the success to support his brother. He doesn't want it. He's not going to do it. So therefore, you have to give it to Jacob, because even though it's not Jacob's domain, and it doesn't really belong to him, but he has to get involved in the material world, and it's going to be a struggle for him because it's against his nature. And like Zena says, there is side effects to this, and we'll see it right away. Next parsha, he has to run away. Just the fact that he has to run away, he can't live in the tranquility of the spiritual existence the way he lived in the tents, and now he has to work for a living, etc., etc. The point here is that he's taking it all for himself, because if you want to defend them, it's because Esav is not ready for the task. He's not up to the task. And that's why Jacob says, I can't bless you. What am I going to bless you? To be part of the deal? You're going to get the physical part of the blessing? I gave him everything. So Esav says, I don't need it. So no problem. Give me a different blessing. I want fat of the land. I don't want fat of the land to support Isaac. And the rabbis say, when he said the fat of the land, he says, this is Italy. Apparently it was very fertile. And of course the rabbis, it's fertile. And of course the rabbis see Rome as Esav, because Rome just destroyed the temple. They say, okay, you don't want part of Abraham, you want your own blessing? Fine, I'll give you Italy. I'll give you Western culture. But the point here is that is only because Jacob takes everything. Why does Jacob take everything? Either because it was a mistake, or because Rebecca was right and Esav was not up to the task. So blessing Esav at that point will not help him. In fact, it will make it worse. That's the defense. That's the defense of Rebecca. Take it or leave it. We don't live in a theocracy, unfortunately. No, I'm only kidding, and therefore I can't impose any specific view on you.
But can you tell me quickly, remind me, why was it important that Abraham went to the land of Israel? What's so special about the land of Israel to Abraham?
So it's the land.
He's a foreigner.
So it's the land. It's the land that God. It's supposed to be the holy land. The land that God chose for him. What exactly is the quality of the land? So you want to take practical and mystical. So the practical interpretation is that it's actually a good place to get the message out, because it's in the highway. It's between Mesopotamia and Times Square, between Mesopotamia and Egypt. So that's all, and that's why every ancient kingdom wants to control that passage.
So one is the time. So what's the other aspect?
The other aspects are more mystical. That's the place where the divine presence could be felt more than in other places, because it's a mystical interpretation. There's a land that God's eyes, God's providence is upon it from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. Why that land? The answer is, from the mystical perspective, it could have been anywhere. That's the place that God chose. So that's more mystical, but we're not looking for that. You can also take in the practical. You could also say it's actually conducive to dependence on God. That's what Moshe alludes to in Deuteronomy, where in Egypt you have the Nile, so you're not dependent on heaven. You think you have what you think is a secure source of income that's not dependent on God. Of course, it's not, nothing is secure forever. So there are sometimes famine in Egypt, but it's very rare. And that's why, but Joseph's dream, and Joseph says it's going to be a famine. No one else comes up with the idea, because that's the equivalent of saying the empire is going to collapse. Things like that don't happen. So you have the Nile, and Israel is not desert. No, there's no Nile, but it's not desert, but it has rain, but the rain is not so common. So that's like the perfect mix of, you could have a land that flows with milk and honey, you could have produce, you could grow, you could have Eretz, a land of water, but it's one that you realize that you're dependent on Hashem.
And if we believe that God is everywhere in the universe,
Yeah.
right? Why is he more?
God is everywhere, but God is more accessible. In other words, how much, certainly from the Kabbalistic perspective, God is everywhere, but the question is, where's the tzimtzum? Where's the concealment? The concealment is less severe in Israel. So God's presence, God is equally everywhere. The prophets say the entire earth is full of God's glory. But you can ask that question about everything, about holiness and unholiness. Is God more in holiness than in unholiness? Right? Everything is as a spark of God. But the thing is, in the unholiness, the spark of God is so covered and trapped and so inaccessible. It's still there, but from the perspective of the recipient of the creation, we don't see it. It's hidden. It's also in exile, which means it can't express itself. But God is everywhere equally. But the question, so that's from the objective perspective. But from the subjective perspective, how do we see it and how do we feel it? That's already here. There's already gradations. There are differences.
And other big question is, so after this story takes place, which is a big tumult, right, and very upsetting to everybody, right?
Yeah.
All four partners, and their partners. So what's the story now with Rivka and Esau after Jacob runs away?
We don't know. The Torah doesn't explicitly talk about it. We don't even know that Esau knows that this is Rebekah's conspiracy.
But he must suspect it.
I don't know. He's blaming his brother. My brother came with cunningness and stole my blessing. Maybe. I mean, it doesn't.
So the Midrashic world has nothing to say.
I wouldn't say it has nothing to say, because I don't know. You can't prove a non-existent. I would have to go look.
Black swan.
I have to go look. But I don't remember anything. I would imagine that even if she favors one son, if she doesn't necessarily make her favoritism known. In other words, we suspect, my brother suspect, me and my brother suspected my mother has a favorite son. It's not me, but she'll never acknowledge it. We say, don't you love this one the most? She says, no. We don't believe her, but she's not going to say it. So I suspect that if Rebecca is a half decent mother, she's not going to tell Esau, oh, I don't like you. Right. So I hope Esau doesn't know that. Yaakov certainly didn't tell Esau, oh, don't blame me, blame my mother. That I hope he didn't do either.
And I apologize if I've already asked this question in the past. Does the Torah disrespect Rivka by not telling us that she dies and she's buried?
Yeah, the Torah doesn't tell it to us. Is that related? That probably is. Let's wait till we get there so I can look at the commentaries, but that could be part of it.
Because we hear that her.
We hear Isaac passed away, right? And we hear about Isaac passing away. We don't hear explicitly about Rebecca passing away. Yeah, that could be.
And she's still connected to her brother, right? In some ways. Because the Torah often refers to her as the brother of Lavan.
Right.
And Lavan is a pretty tricky guy.
Lavan is cunning. Yeah.
And she's kind of cunning to do this story.
Right. Okay, so that you have all the facts, and then the puzzle.
No, I only have some.
No. I mean to say we have all the we have the pieces of the puzzle. And then you could put them together and emphasize. You can color it in which one you emphasize, what you want to emphasize, and what you want to de-emphasize. But you have what I have.
No, I don't have what you have.
No. It's all here. It's not. There's no secret formula that is Torah's for everybody. Yes.
Robert, doesn't Laban present the model where we have to be honest with the honest, but they can be dishonest with the dishonest.
Yes. Yeah, the Torah does, the Talmud says it based on a person's Psalms, correct. Correct. But here, but that won't help for Rebecca.
No, it wasn't,
Right,
I
yeah.
mean, as a general thing.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, that kind of brings us to the conversation that we had at the beginning. Because I think the most problematic thing in the whole story is that Rebecca did not discuss it with Isaac, that, I think Esau is not ready, because that was a beautiful interpretation, that Esau is not ready to support Yaakov in that, in studying Torah.
Right.
So that may be the lesson for us to be honest with communication, and also study Torah. That's how we can correct that mistake. Study Torah and have endless discussions about what's right and wrong. And that's the only solution to all our problems.
Yeah,
What do you think?
that makes sense. That makes sense. In other words, according to both Jacob and Rebecca, both Isaac and Rebecca, the value of materialism is that it supports spirituality. The only dispute was, could we make this deal between Esau and Yaakov, Esau and Jacob, where one has material and one has spiritual, or is Esau not ready, and therefore Isaac has to quote unquote Jacob has to quote unquote get his hands dirty and get involved in materialism because Esau is not ready, and we have to do both. But they both agree that the value of materialism is to support spirituality, and therefore.
Right, but if Rebecca went to Jacob and had that same conversation with him, and that's the problem at the very beginning.
We don't want to. I agree with you. We don't want to rehash what we said last week. You could say that she didn't want to do it because she was in awe. You could say she didn't want to do it because she didn't want to tell him that Esau is no good. Esau is not ready. Whatever the case is, so that is something we have to deal with. But what I'm trying to say, what's the takeaway? What's the takeaway from the story? That Isaac cannot even imagine a scenario where Esau wants a blessing if he can't support Jacob with that blessing. It's like, okay, so I already gave him, he's not dependent on materialism because he already has the blessing for the grain. So what can I give you? Give you just cash in the bank? That's not what you want. You want part of the legacy. You want to have the material side of the legacy to support the legacy. And Esau says, no, give me Italy. Oh, you want Italy? Take Italy. But that's not in Isaac's mind, that's not a blessing. It's not a value. The value of materialism is that it supports the spiritual life.
But
therefore,
for us to understand it, we need to study Torah and come to this conclusion by analyzing all the scenarios and connecting it to our lives. And that's the main lesson.
Indeed. Okay, I think we'll stop here, even though it's 2 minutes early, because the next thing is another whole subject. We're going to go back and we're going to analyze the actual blessing of Jacob, of Isaac to Jacob, who he thinks is Esau. And it's fascinating because you have commentaries and commentaries and commentaries all on one word, v'yitenecha, and God should give you, what's the and? And there are many, many interpretations. So we went a little ahead. We're going to go back next week, God willing, in good health. Thank you all for joining. Go ahead, Bob.
Just to wrap up, I mean, let's not forget, we read Bereshit yesterday. I mean, within a few verses, man is screwing up. I mean, that really is, Genesis is a book where we find out that man is not perfect, that he quite often makes poor choices, and that it's about repentance and circumstance and shifting and pivoting that really is the story of Genesis.
Yes, I agree. And I also think that we're getting better, because in Genesis, the two brothers kill each other. Here, they just steal. So it's actually a little bit better. But the critique, but what's still challenging is that there is no story, and there is no, you're going to say it's still too early, but there's no story where Jacob really apologizes for Esau. He sends him gifts. He says, I want to be a friend. He does all kinds of things. They meet up, they hug, they kiss. There's no indication where Jacob acknowledges what he did was wrong. So it's part of the complexity of the story.
But it's just like you said, Cain killed Abel Esau and Jacob never made up, but by the time of Joseph, they're hugging and kissing.
Yeah, so they did make up temporarily. They did hug. Is a beautiful scene in the Torah. They both hug. It's wonderful, but they separate, right? And then Joseph and his brothers, you have some form of apology, but even though you will get to the year, it's not perfect, right? The balance of power is too uneven to make it a legitimate apology, right?
But there's forward progress.
Yes, I agree.
Thank you, Rabbi.
So in general, I read from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs this week. I didn't write it this week, but why is Genesis telling us about family? Well, so a lot of Genesis is basically family stories. We're talking about the Torah. The first Rashi says we should start with the commandments. Why telling us about family? So he says at least 2 points. One point is that we'll start with the spiritual. One point is that the model of our connection to God, when we're born, we don't understand about God, it's too abstract. So our model of relationships is with family. And once we understand and appreciate and figure out how to have relationships with family, then you can apply that concept to God. Because God is your spouse, God is your parent, that same form of relationship where with the parents, it's unconditional. And with the spouse, it is conditional and it's a covenant. So really we start with the natural relationships. And once we figure those out, then you could start applying that to God, to the spiritual life. That's one point he says. Another point he says is before we could make peace with the world, you have to make peace with your family. Right? You know, people who want to change the world, but in their own family, they can't get along. That's not the Torah's model. So first in Genesis, before we try to figure out how to make a nation and how to ultimately influence the entire world, before that, you have to understand that the foundation of everything is peace within the home. And if it takes a book and it takes 300 years to figure that out, so may it be. And then you could take those lessons of repentance, of loyalty that you learn the hard way from your family, and then you could apply it to the broader community. But you can't jump to the broader community and try to make peace in the world if you can't make peace with your brother. So that's just two interesting ideas about Genesis in general, which we read yesterday. But obviously here we're smack in the middle of the book and we're watching all this play out.
But we never figure out the relationships within the family.
Eventually we do. Eventually you have Moses and Aaron. The older one is happy for the younger one. It's not perfect. Mashiach is not here. We're not in the era of tranquility, but like Bob says, we're certainly making progress, and we certainly understand the value, and we understand that this is a concept, and we understand the problem when we don't have the transparency, and we don't have the connection between the brothers, which ultimately leads to you can make an argument that ultimately leads to the destruction in Egypt, to the slavery in Egypt, because this blessing forces him to run away, and then he's cheated, and then he has two wives. And then he loves the younger one, and he loves the younger one's son, and he loves Joseph, and they sell Joseph as a slave, etc. You know the story, but it all could be really traced back to this point.
Yashikar.
Okay, Yashikar. Thank you. Wonderful day, everybody. Be well.
Thank you, Rabbi.